When Lewis Hamilton's phone buzzed on that gray November evening in 2023, he almost ignored it. Unknown number. Italian area code. He'd gotten thousands of random calls before. Journalists, fans, people wanting something from the seven-time world champion. But something made him answer. Lewis Hamilton? The voice was warm, older, speaking English with a thick Italian accent. My name is Matteo Castellani. I'm calling from Maranello. Maranello, Ferrari headquarters. Lewis's heart started racing. We have 5 minutes of your time, Matteo said. That's all we ask. 5 minutes that will change everything you thought you knew about your father, about racing, and about why you were always meant to wear red. Lewis's hands started shaking. His father? What could Ferrari possibly know about Anthony Hamilton that Lewis didn't know? And they'd lived through everything together. The karting years, the struggles, the victories, everything. I don't understand, Lewis whispered into the phone. In 1994, your father made a choice, Matteo continued, his voice soft but powerful. A choice that cost him everything. And we've been waiting 29 years to make it right. Lewis was only 9 years old that year. That was the year his dad mortgaged their house to pay for Lewis's karting. The year money became so tight, his parents argued constantly. The year that eventually led to their divorce. What choice was Matteo talking about? Mr. Castellani, please, just listen, Matteo interrupted gently. Your father came to Maranello in July 1994. You don't remember because he told you he was going to a job interview in London. But he came here, to Ferrari, to see us. Lewis felt the room spinning around him. He sat down on his couch, gripping the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. My dad went to Ferrari? Lewis asked, his voice cracking. Yes, and Lewis? Your father was the most brilliant young engineer we'd ever interviewed. Self-taught, working class. A black British man who'd taught himself complicated car design through library books while working 3 jobs to support your family. The designs he showed us were 15 years ahead of their time. Lewis couldn't breathe. His father had never mentioned this. Not once. In all their years together, through all the races and championships, his dad had never said a single word about applying to Ferrari. We offered him the position, Matteo said quietly. Lead engineer. The salary would have changed your family's life forever, and he could have moved you all to Italy. No more money problems, no more struggling. Your father would have been rich. Lewis thought about those years, eating cheap food for dinner, his mom working extra shifts, his dad exhausted from multiple jobs, the constant stress about money that tore his parents' marriage apart. Then why? Lewis couldn't finish his sentence. His throat was too tight. We had one condition, Matteo explained. The job required 70-hour work weeks, constant travel. He would miss your karting races, maybe see you 1 weekend per month, if he was lucky. Suddenly, Lewis understood. He could picture his dad at every single one of his races. Every single one. Rain or shine. Tired from work, but always there. Always helping with the kart. Always standing at the fence watching. Always cheering. And his father had never missed a race. Not one. What did he do? Lewis whispered, though he already knew the answer. He sat in our meeting room for 20 minutes, looking at the contract, Matteo said. Then he stood up, straightened his tie, and said, Thank you for this incredible opportunity. But my son is going to be a Formula One champion one day, and when he does it, I'm going to be there for every lap. I can't do that from here. Lewis started crying. Silent tears ran down his face as he sat alone in his Monaco apartment. He walked away from his dream job, Lewis. He walked away from generational wealth to push your go-kart at small racing tracks in England. To be there every weekend. To sacrifice everything so you could have everything. The phone call that started as 5 minutes turned into something much longer. And what Matteo told Lewis next would change everything. Not just about his relationship with his father, but about his entire racing career. Because Ferrari hadn't just called to tell Lewis a story about 1994. They'd called because of something else, something secret, something that had been kept hidden for 29 years. A promise made by a man Lewis had never met. A promise that would explain why Ferrari wanted Lewis Hamilton so desperately. A promise that would reveal the real reason Lewis left Mercedes. And it had nothing to do with the car. But before we get to that bombshell revelation, you need to understand what happened next. You need to see how Lewis confronted his father about this secret. You need to know about the mysterious document Ferrari had been keeping in a locked cabinet since 1994. And you need to discover the promise that would bring tears to Lewis's eyes and change Formula One history forever. Stay with us for this incredible true story, because what happens next will shock you. And by the end, you'll understand why Lewis Hamilton's move to Ferrari wasn't just about racing. It was about love, sacrifice, and a father's choice that echoed across 3 decades. Let's start from the beginning. Lewis Hamilton sat alone in his Monaco apartment, staring at the Mediterranean through floor-to-ceiling windows that cost more than most people's houses. The sea was gray today, matching the November sky. Gray like the Mercedes cars he'd driven for 11 years. Gray like how he felt inside. His phone buzzed on the marble counter. An unknown number. Italian country code. Lewis almost ignored it. He got random calls constantly. Journalists fishing for quotes, brands wanting endorsements, fans who'd somehow found his private number. But something made him pause. Something made him swipe to answer. Hello? Lewis Hamilton. The voice was warm, older, speaking English with a thick Italian accent. My name is Matteo Castellani. I'm calling from Maranello. Lewis's heart skipped. Maranello, Ferrari headquarters. But this wasn't Fred Vasseur, the team principal. This wasn't anyone Lewis recognized. Who are you? Lewis asked carefully. I work for Ferrari, but not in the way you think. Matteo's voice was gentle, almost grandfatherly. Lewis, we have 5 minutes of your time. That's all we ask. 5 minutes that will change everything you thought you knew. Lewis felt his stomach tighten. 5 minutes? That was oddly specific. 5 minutes about what? About your father, Matteo said quietly. About racing, and about why you were always meant to wear red. The room seemed to tilt. Lewis gripped the counter edge, his knuckles turning white. His father? What could Ferrari possibly know about Anthony Hamilton that Lewis didn't? They'd lived through everything together. The karting years, the junior formulas, the struggles, the victories, everything. I don't understand, Lewis whispered. In 1994, your father made a choice, Matteo continued. A choice that cost him everything, and we've been waiting 29 years to make it right. Lewis's mind raced. 1994. He was 9 years old. That was the year everything changed for their family. The year his dad mortgaged their house in Stevenage to fund Lewis's karting career. The year money became so tight his mom and dad argued constantly. The year that eventually led to their divorce. What choice? What was Matteo talking about? Mr. Castellani, Please, call me Matteo. And please, just listen. I promised myself if I ever got to make this call, I would tell it right." There was emotion in the old man's voice now, something deep and genuine. "Your father came to Maranello in July 1994. You don't remember because he told you he was going to a job interview in London?" Louis felt his legs weaken. He moved to the leather sofa and sat down, phone pressed so hard against his ear it hurt. "My dad went to Ferrari?" "Yes. He came to see us about a position. Louis, your father was the most brilliant young aerodynamicist we'd ever interviewed." "Aerodynamicist?" Louis's voice cracked. "My dad worked for the railroad. He was a contractor. He wasn't—" "He was self-taught," Matteo interrupted gently. "Working class. A black British engineer who'd taught himself fluid dynamics through library books and night courses while working 3 jobs to support your family. The designs he showed us were 15 years ahead of their time. We'd never seen anything like it." Louis couldn't breathe. His father had never mentioned this. Never. In all their years together, through all the races, all the victories, all the long drives home from circuits across England, never once had Anthony Hamilton mentioned applying to Ferrari. "Why are you telling me this?" Louis asked, his throat tight. "Because we offered him the position," Matteo said. "Lead aerodynamicist. The salary was substantial. Life-changing money, Louis. He could have moved your family to Italy. He provided for you, your brother Nicholas, your mother. No more mortgage payments, no more struggling. Your father would have been wealthy." The words hung in the air. Louis thought about those years, eating beans on toast for dinner, his mum Carmen taking on extra shifts, his dad working weekends, the constant stress about money that eventually tore his parents apart. Then why? Louis couldn't finish the sentence. "We had one condition," Matteo said softly. "The position required 70-hour weeks, minimum, constant travel between Maranello and the wind tunnel in Cologne, race weekends across Europe. It was a demanding job for a demanding team." Louis already knew where this was going. His chest felt like someone was sitting on it. "He would miss your karting races," Matteo continued. "Maybe see you one weekend a month if he was lucky. We were honest about that. Ferrari demands everything." Louis closed his eyes. He could picture his dad at every single karting race, every single one, rain or shine, tired from work, but always there, always helping prepare the kart, always standing at the fence, watching, always cheering. "What did he do?" Louis whispered, though he already knew. "He sat in our conference room for 20 minutes, Matteo said, looking at the contract. We'd left him alone to think. I was a junior assistant then, just 23 years old. I watched him through the glass door. He had his head in his hands. Then he stood up, straightened his tie, and came out." Louis was crying now, silent tears running down his face. He shook our hands and said, "Thank you for this incredible opportunity. But my son is going to be a Formula One champion one day. And when he does it, I'm going to be there for every lap. I can't do that from here." The sob that escaped Louis's throat was involuntary. He covered his mouth with his hand, trying to stay quiet, trying to let Matteo finish. He walked away from generational wealth, Louis. He walked away from his dream job to push your kart at club races in England, to be there every weekend, to sacrifice everything so you could have everything. Louis couldn't speak. Images flooded his mind. His dad's tired eyes at dawn, driving them to circuits hours away. His dad's rough hands working on the kart engine late at night. His dad sleeping in their van at races to save money on hotels. His dad's proud smile every time Lewis crossed the finish line, even if it was last place, every sacrifice, every moment. So all of it suddenly recontextualized by this revelation. "Lewis?" Matteo's voice was gentle. "Are you still there?" "Yes," Lewis managed, his voice broken. "Ferrari has waited 29 years to honor your father's sacrifice," Matteo said. "We want you here, Lewis. Not because of your 7 championships, not because of your brand value or your commercial appeal, but because Anthony Hamilton believed in Ferrari when no one else did. And we believe in you the way he believed in you. Completely, unconditionally. The way a father believes in his son." Lewis pressed his fist against his mouth, trying not to break down completely. "We're not offering you a contract, Lewis. We're offering you a homecoming. We're offering you the chance to fulfill the dream your father walked away from so you could chase yours. We're offering you red, Lewis. The red your father chose you over. The red that's been waiting for you your whole life." The silence stretched between Monaco and Maranello, across hundreds of miles and 29 years of waiting. Finally, Lewis found his voice. "Does my dad know you're calling?" "No," Matteo said, "but I hope you'll tell him. I hope you'll ask him about that day. And I hope when you do, you'll understand why Ferrari isn't just a team to us. It's a family. And families remember. Families honor. Families wait." Lewis wiped his eyes, his hands shaking. "I need time." "Take all the time you need," Matteo said warmly. "But Lewis, your father spent 29 years making sure you had every opportunity. Maybe it's time you took the opportunity he never could. Maybe it's time to come home to the place he never could forget." The call ended. Sir Lewis sat motionless on his sofa, watching the gray sea, holding his phone like it was something precious and fragile. Outside, Monaco sparkled with wealth and success. Inside, Lewis Hamilton felt like that 9-year-old boy again, watching his father work on a go-kart in their tiny garage, never knowing the price his dad had paid to be there. He looked at his phone, scrolled to Dad. His thumb hovered over the call button. 29 years of questions suddenly needed answers, and everything Lewis thought he knew about his career, his success, and his future just shattered and reformed into something entirely new. Something red. The thought wouldn't leave Lewis's mind as he boarded his private jet to England 3 days later. He hadn't called his father yet. He needed to see him face to face. Some conversations couldn't happen over the phone. But first, he had obligations. A Mercedes sponsor event at the Brackley factory. A day of smiling for cameras and shaking hands with executives who saw him as a walking billboard rather than a racing driver. The jet touched down at London Luton. Lewis's driver met him on the tarmac, a quiet professional who knew not to make small talk. The drive to Brackley took 40 minutes through grey English countryside. Everything felt muted, colorless. Grey, Lewis thought. Everything with Mercedes is grey. Silver, they called it. But really, it was just expensive grey. He'd been with Mercedes for 11 years, longer than some marriages. 7 world championships together, 84 race wins. The most dominant driver-team partnership Formula One had ever seen. The numbers were staggering, historic, unprecedented. So why did it all feel so hollow? The Mercedes-AMG Petronas F1 team headquarters rose from the Northamptonshire landscape like a glass and steel monument to efficiency. Lewis had walked through these doors thousands of times. Today, it felt like visiting a museum of his own past. Inside, the reception area displayed his championship trophies in backlit cases. 7 silver crowns, gleaming under perfect lighting. They looked beautiful, expensive, important. Dead, Lewis thought suddenly. They looked dead. "Lewis, there you are!" Toto Wolff's voice boomed across the atrium. The Austrian team principal strode over, all charisma and expensive cologne. "Ready for today? We've got 40 sponsors waiting. Everyone wants their photo with the champion. Not our champion, not you, just the champion. Like a title. You're like a product." Lewis forced a smile. "Ready when you are." The event was held in the team's hospitality suite. 40 executives from various sponsor companies, petrochemical corporations, luxury watch brands, tech giants. They mingled with champagne and canapes, waiting for their moment with Lewis Hamilton. Lewis shook hands, smiled, posed for photos, said the right things. "Yes, next season looks promising. The car development is going well. We're focused on getting back to the top." Lies. All comfortable lies. The car development wasn't going well. Lewis knew it. The engineers knew it. But no one wanted to admit that Mercedes had lost its way. That the regulations change in 2022 had exposed fundamental flaws in their design philosophy. That they were now the third-best team, maybe fourth, scrambling to understand problems that younger, hungrier teams had already solved. During a break, Lewis stepped outside onto the facility's balcony. The November air was cold and damp. Below, he could see the car assembly area through massive windows. Mechanics worked on next year's chassis. The car looked fast. It probably wasn't. "Lewis?" A woman's voice, tentative. He turned. Sophie Brennan stood in the doorway. She'd been one of Mercedes's most promising young engineers, specializing in suspension dynamics. Lewis hadn't seen her in 6 months. Not since she'd quit. "Sophie?" Lewis smiled genuinely for the first time all day. "What are you doing here?" "They invited me back for the event. I think they want people to think I still work here." She joined him at the railing, her breath fogging in the cold air. How are you?" "Honestly?" "Please." Lewis paused. Sophie had been one of the few people in the organization who'd treated him like a person rather than an asset. They'd spent hours discussing car setup, racing philosophy, life beyond the track. She'd been brilliant, creative, everything a top team should want. "I don't know anymore," Lewis admitted. "Some days I feel like I'm just going through the motions." Sophie nodded slowly. "That's why I left." "Want to tell me about it?" She looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. "Do you remember the front suspension concept I pitched last year? The one you were so excited about?" Lewis remembered. It was innovative, a completely new approach to managing tire temperature through the corners. He'd spent an entire simulator session testing Sophie's design. It was brilliant. It could have been worth 3/10 a lap. "They shelved it," Sophie said quietly. "Said it was too risky, too expensive to develop. But you know what James told me privately?" James Allison was Mercedes's technical director. Lewis respected him immensely. "What did he say?" He said, "Lewis's driving can compensate for suspension limitations. We don't need to innovate when we have Hamilton." Sophie's voice was bitter. "They were using your talent as an excuse not to improve the car." Lewis felt something cold settle in his stomach. "He said that?" That was when I realized, they're not trying to give you a championship car anymore, Lewis. They're just trying to give you a car good enough that your driving makes them look competent. The words hit like a physical blow. Lewis gripped the railing. When did we stop being a team?" he asked quietly. "I think around 2021, Sophie said. "After Abu Dhabi, after everything that happened with Max and the championship. I think something broke in the organization. They stopped trying to build the fastest car and started trying to manage risk. Keep sponsors happy. Maintain the brand. You became part of the furniture instead of the reason for the furniture. Lewis thought about the 2021 season finale, the controversial finish at Abu Dhabi, where he'd lost the championship in the final lap, the devastation, the anger, the sense of injustice. Mercedes had promised to come back stronger, promised to build a car that would reclaim dominance. Instead, they'd built a car that bounced on the straights and couldn't follow in corners, and then spent 2 years making incremental improvements that kept them competitive but never dominant, never hungry. "Why didn't you tell me this before you left?" Lewis asked. Sophie looked at him with sad eyes. "Because you were still winning occasional races, still on the podium. I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just bitter about my designs being rejected. But now, it's been 18 months, and you're fighting for 5th place, while they parade around the new young driver like he's the second coming." Andrea Petrov, 22 years old, fast, hungry. Mercedes' future. Lewis had seen the writing on that wall for months. He'd watched Toto light up around Andrea in a way he hadn't lit up around Lewis in years. Watched the team invest resources in developing Andrea's feedback style. Watched himself slowly becoming the expensive past, while Andrea became the affordable future. "I'm not the future anymore," Lewis said aloud, the realization settling like snow. "No," Sophie agreed gently. "You're not. And they're never going to tell you that directly. They'll just keep collecting your salary's worth in sponsor money while slowly withdrawing support, until one day you retire and they throw you a big party and everyone pretends it was your choice." Lewis looked at her. "Is that why you're really here? To tell me this?" "I'm here because you deserve to know the truth," Sophie said. "You gave them 11 years, 7 championships. You made them billions. And now they're treating you like an asset that's depreciated. Like you're supposed to be grateful they're still letting you drive." Inside, through the glass doors, Lewis could see Toto laughing with a group of sponsors. Andrea stood next to him, young and bright-eyed, everything Lewis used to be. "What are you doing now?" Lewis asked. "Working for a sustainable transport startup, electric buses. We're trying to revolutionize public transport in developing countries." Sophie smiled. "Turns out, there are places that actually want innovation instead of just risk management." "You happy?" "Happier than I was here. They actually listen to my ideas." She paused. "Lewis, you're the greatest driver of your generation, maybe of all time. But greatness means nothing if the people around you treat it like an inconvenience. At some point, you have to ask yourself, do they want to win with you, or do they just want to extract what's left before you're done?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Then before Lewis could respond, a PR assistant poked her head out. "Lewis, they need you for the sponsor photos." "Coming," Lewis said automatically. Sophie touched his arm gently. "Whatever you're thinking about doing, whether it's staying or going, just make sure it's for you. Not for them, not for the legacy, for you, the person, not the champion." She walked back inside, leaving Lewis alone on the balcony. Below, in the assembly area, mechanics bolted parts onto next year's car. Silver parts. Gray parts. The same color they'd been for 11 years. Lewis pulled out his phone and opened his photos. Scrolled back through years of images. Championships. Podiums. Victories. In every photo, he was surrounded by silver. He thought about Matteo's call, about his father's choice in 1994, about the red Lewis had never driven. His phone buzzed. A text from his dad. "You still coming by this week? Got something I want to show you." Lewis stared at the message. His father didn't know about Matteo's call, didn't know that Lewis knew about Ferrari. He typed back, "Tomorrow. We need to talk." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, about what? Lewis's fingers hovered over the keyboard. How do you ask your father about a sacrifice he never told you about? How do you revisit a choice made 29 years ago that shaped your entire life? He typed, 1994. The 3 dots appeared and stayed for a long time. Then, "I'll put the kettle on." Inside, Toto was waving at Lewis through the glass, pointing at his watch. Time to get back to work. Time to smile for the cameras. Time to be Lewis Hamilton, the asset. Lewis walked back inside, past the trophy cases displaying his 7 championships, past the photos of him in silver race suits, past the whole museum of his Mercedes career. As he rejoined the sponsors and forced another smile, Sophie's question echoed in his mind. Do they want to win with you? Or do they just want to extract what's left? And underneath that question, Matteo's words, "We're offering you the red your father chose you over." That night, Lewis drove back to his London apartment. He sat in his living room, surrounded by success. Awards, photos, memorabilia from a career that would go down in history. None of it felt like his anymore. It all felt silver, gray, beautiful, but hollow. He thought about red, about Ferrari, about his father standing in Maranello 29 years ago, choosing his son over his dreams. Maybe, Lewis thought, it was finally time to choose too. Not the safe choice, not the comfortable choice, but the true choice. The one that honored what his father had given up. The one painted red. Lewis couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his London apartment, staring at the ceiling, Matteo's words playing on an endless loop in his mind. Your father made a choice that cost him everything. At 2:47 a.m., Lewis gave up on sleep. He made coffee and sat by the window overlooking the Thames. The city lights reflected off the dark water like scattered diamonds. Beautiful, cold, distant. He picked up his phone and scrolled through old photos of his dad. Anthony at karting tracks, always smiling despite the exhaustion in his eyes. Anthony holding trophies that belonged to Lewis. Anthony standing proudly at Lewis's first F1 race, tears streaming down his face. In every single photo, his father looked happy, complete. Like watching his son race was the only thing in the world that mattered. Had he ever regretted Ferrari? Had he ever wondered what his life might have been? Lewis's phone sat heavy in his hand. He could call Matteo back, ask more questions. But he needed to talk to his father first. Needed to understand before he made any decisions. The drive to Stevenage the next morning took 90 minutes through thick traffic. Lewis drove himself, no driver, no security. Just him and the motorway and his thoughts. He pulled up to his father's modest house at 11 a.m. The same house they'd lived in when Lewis was a boy. Before the mortgage, before the karting costs, before everything changed. His father had bought it back years later, after Lewis made it to F1. A circle completed. Then Anthony Hamilton was waiting at the door. At 68, his father still stood straight and proud. Gray hair, warm eyes, hands that still showed the calluses from decades of manual work. He wore a simple jumper and jeans. He looked at Lewis with an expression that was difficult to read. "Come in, son," Anthony said quietly. They sat at the kitchen table. The same table where Lewis had done homework, while his dad worked on kart engines. The same table where they'd celebrated Lewis's first karting win with fish and chips. The same table where, 29 years ago, Anthony Hamilton had probably sat after returning from Maranello, keeping a secret that would change everything. Anthony made tea, Earl Grey, the way they both liked it. He set the mug in front of Louis and sat down across from him. "So," Anthony said, "Dawn 1994. Louis wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "Ferrari called me." His father's face didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe relief. "Matteo Castellani," Louis continued. "He told me you went to Maranello. Told me you interviewed for a job. Told me they offered you a position." Anthony nodded slowly. He took a sip of his tea, hands steady, but Louis could see the emotion building behind his father's careful composure. "He told you about the money," Anthony said. "It wasn't a question. He told me everything, Dad. He told me you walked away from a dream job, from a salary that would have changed our lives, from working at Ferrari." Louis's voice cracked. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Anthony set down his tea and looked at his son with eyes that held 29 years of love and certainty. Because I didn't want you to feel like you owed me something," he said simply. "I didn't want you carrying guilt every time you raced. I didn't want you thinking that my happiness depended on your success." "But it did," Louis said, tears starting. "Dad, you gave up everything." "I gave up nothing," Anthony interrupted firmly. "Louis, look at me. I gave up nothing." Louis met his father's eyes. "That job at Ferrari? That was just a job. Good money, yes. Prestigious, yes. But it was still just a job." Anthony reached across the table and took Louis's hand. "You were my son. You are my son. Watching you race, being there for every lap, every victory, every disappointment. That wasn't a sacrifice, Louis. That was a privilege. But Mom, the divorce, the money problems. Your mother and I had problems that had nothing to do with you or Ferrari," Anthony said gently. "We were young. We wanted different things. The money didn't help, but it wasn't the reason. And yes, things were tight. Yes, I worked multiple jobs. But Louis, I was there. I was there when you won your first club race. I was there when you crashed at Rye House and thought you'd never want to race again. I was there when you got the McLaren call. I was there." Anthony's voice grew stronger, more passionate. "That Ferrari job? I would have missed all of it. I would have been in wind tunnels in Germany while you were learning to handle a cart in the rain. I would have been in meetings in Italy while you were discovering that racing was your calling. And I would have had money in my pocket and a hole in my heart." Louis couldn't hold back anymore. He broke down, sobbing at the kitchen table like he hadn't done since he was a child. "I never knew," he managed. "I never knew what you gave up for me." "Because you weren't supposed to know," Anthony said, his own voice thick with emotion. "That's what parents do, son. We make choices. We make sacrifices. But they're not sacrifices if we'd make them again 1,000 times. And I would. Every single time." They sat in silence for a moment, both crying, both holding on to each other's hands across the table. Finally, Louis wiped his eyes. "Dad, there's something else. Ferrari didn't just call to tell me about 1994. They want me to drive for them." Anthony's eyes widened. "They offered you a contract?" "Not yet. But Matteo said they want me. Said they've waited 29 years to honor your choice, to give me the drive you walked away from." Anthony sat back in his chair, processing this. "What did you tell them?" "I haven't decided yet. That's why I came here. I needed to talk to you first." His father looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood up and said, "Come with me." They walked to the garage, the same garage where they'd worked on carts for years. Anthony flipped on the light and went to a storage cabinet in the back. He pulled out an old cardboard box, dusty and worn. "I've kept this for 29 years, Anthony said. "Never shown it to anyone, not even your mom." He opened the box. Inside were manila folders filled with papers. Anthony pulled out the top folder and handed it to Louis. Louis opened it. Inside were detailed aerodynamic sketches, hand-drawn, uncovered in mathematical equations and annotations. Wind flow patterns around car bodies, calculations for downforce optimization, designs that, even to Louis's trained eye, looked sophisticated and innovative. "You drew these?" Louis whispered. "Every night after you went to bed," Anthony said. "I taught myself fluid dynamics through library books, took correspondence courses from a technical college, spent every spare moment trying to understand how air moves around cars." Louis flipped through page after page. The work was meticulous, brilliant. His father had been a genuine engineering talent. This one, Anthony pulled out a specific sketch, was my proudest design. A front-wing concept that would have reduced drag by 8% while maintaining downforce. And the Ferrari engineers said it was the most original thinking they'd seen in years. Louis stared at the sketch, at his father's handwriting, at the evidence of a dream his dad had never pursued. "You could have been legendary," Louis said quietly. Anthony smiled and put his hand on Louis's shoulder. "I am legendary. I'm Lewis Hamilton's father. I'm the man who raised a 7-time world champion. I'm the man who got to stand in the garage at Silverstone and watch his son win the British Grand Prix in front of our home crowd. What Ferrari position could possibly compete with that?" "But you gave up your dream." "No," Anthony interrupted. "I chose a different dream, a better dream. Louis, some men build fast cars. I built something faster. I built you." Louis couldn't speak. He looked at the sketches, at his father's face, at the garage where they'd spent countless hours together. "So, if you're asking for my permission to drive for Ferrari," Anthony continued, "you don't need it. You never needed it. But I'll tell you what I told those men in Maranello in 1994. You do what makes you happy. You do what feeds your soul. You do what makes you feel alive." "Mercedes doesn't make me feel alive anymore," Louis admitted. "It feels like I'm just collecting a paycheck while they wait for me to retire." Anthony nodded. "Then maybe it's time for something new. Maybe it's time to see what that red looks like on you. You think I should do it?" "I think," Anthony said carefully, "that I spent 29 years making sure you had every opportunity to become who you were meant to be. And if who you're meant to be includes driving for Ferrari, then you'd be dishonoring my sacrifice by saying no." Louis laughed through his tears. "That's emotional blackmail, Dad." "That's parenting, son," Anthony grinned. "I've earned the right to meddle." They stood together in the garage, surrounded by the ghosts of all those years of karting, all those early morning drives to circuits, all those late nights working on engines that barely ran. "Can I tell you something?" Anthony said quietly. "Something I've never told anyone?" "Of course." "After I walked out of Ferrari that day in 1994, I stood outside their factory for about 10 minutes. Just stood there, looking at the building, looking at the Ferrari logo, looking at the place where I almost worked." Anthony's voice was distant, remembering. "And you know what I felt?" "What?" "Grateful. Grateful that I had something more important to walk back to. Grateful that I had a son worth choosing over any dream job. Grateful that I got to be your father, instead of just another engineer building someone else's dreams." Anthony looked at Louis with absolute clarity. "So, you go to Ferrari, if that's what you want. You go and you drive that red car and you make it sing. Not for me, not to fulfill some destiny, but because after 11 years of silver, maybe you need to find out what red feels like. Maybe you need to discover if there's still fire left, or if it's all just been about the trophy count. Louis pulled his father into a tight embrace. They stood like that for a long moment, in a garage that held more memories than any museum ever could. When they finally pulled apart, Anthony said, "Now, are you going to call Ferrari back? Or are you going to make them wait another 29 years?" Louis laughed. "I think they've waited long enough." "Good," Anthony said, "because between you and me, I'd quite like to see what you look like in red before I'm too old to appreciate it." That evening, Louis drove back to London with his father's old Ferrari portfolio on the passenger seat. The sketches his dad had never pursued. The dreams that had been set aside for something more important. He thought about Matteo's call, about Sophie's warning at Mercedes, about Toto's indifference and Andrea's bright future. He thought about 11 years of silver and what it had cost him to stay comfortable. And he thought about his father, standing outside Ferrari in 1994, choosing his son over everything else. Maybe, Louis thought, it was time to honor that choice by finally taking the opportunity his father had walked away from. Maybe it was time to stop playing it safe and start racing with purpose again. Maybe it was time to find out what red felt like. He pulled over at a rest stop and called Matteo's number. The Italian answered on the second ring. "Louis?" "Tell me more," Louis said. "Tell me everything." Matteo's voice warmed immediately. "Come to Maranello. Some things need to be said in person." "When?" "Whenever you're ready. We'll be waiting." Louis hung up and sat in his car at the rest stop, watching trucks rumble past on the motorway. His heart pounded. This was real. This was actually happening. But first, he had one more commitment, one more Mercedes event he couldn't cancel. 2 days later, Louis returned to Brackley for a technical debrief about next season's car development. The meeting room was cold and sterile. White walls, glass table, ergonomic chairs that cost £1,000 each, but felt like sitting on stone. Toto sat at the head of the table. James Allison presented aerodynamic data on a large screen. Andrea Petrov sat across from Louis, taking notes eagerly, asking intelligent questions about tire degradation and brake cooling. Louis watched the young Russian driver and saw himself 15 years ago, hungry, passionate, believing the team cared about him as a person, not just as a point scorer. "Louis?" Toto's voice cut through his thoughts. "Your thoughts on the front wing concept?" Louis looked at the screen. The design was conservative, safe, incremental improvement over last year's failed concept. "So it's fine," Louis said. Toto frowned. "Just fine?" "It won't win us the championship," Louis said flatly, "but it'll keep us competitive for 4th place in the constructors' standings." The room went silent. James Allison shifted uncomfortably. "That's quite pessimistic," Toto said carefully. "It's realistic," Louis replied. "We're not building a championship car. We're building a car that's good enough to keep sponsors happy while we transition to Andrea's era." Andrea looked down at his notes, embarrassed. Toto's jaw tightened. "That's not fair, Louis. We're investing heavily in development." "In safe development," Louis interrupted. "In concepts that won't embarrass us, but won't win us races either. When was the last time we took a real risk? When was the last time we tried something genuinely innovative, instead of copying what Red Bull or Ferrari did the previous year?" James cleared his throat. "Louis, the regulations are quite restrictive. There's only so much." "Sophie Brennan had innovative ideas," Louis said quietly. real innovation. And you rejected them because you assumed my driving could compensate for engineering limitations. The silence was deafening. Toto's expression hardened. Who told you that? Does it matter? Lewis stood up. I've given this team 11 years, 7 championships, everything I had. And somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as a depreciating asset. Lewis, that's not... I'm not finished, Lewis said, surprised by the steel in his own voice. I've watched you light up around Andrea the way you used to light up around me. I've watched resources shift. I've watched my feedback get noted and ignored while his gets implemented immediately. I'm not angry about it, Toto. He's the future. I understand that. Lewis picked up his jacket. But I'm not ready to be the past. Not yet. And I won't spend the next 2 years being paraded around as the famous driver while you quietly push me aside. Where is this coming from? Toto demanded. Is someone talking to you? Is this about another team? Lewis paused at the door. This is about me remembering why I started racing. And it wasn't to manage sponsors or maintain brand image. It was to win, to push limits, to feel alive. He walked out, leaving the room in stunned silence. That night, Lewis sat in his apartment and made the call he'd been avoiding. His phone rang 3 times before his mother answered. Lewis, is everything all right? Carmen Larbalestier's voice always carried warmth, even after all these years since the divorce. She'd remarried, built a new life, but remained Lewis's fierce protector. Mom, did you know Dad applied to Ferrari in 1994? Long pause. How did you find out? They called me. Ferrari called me. Oh, Lewis. His mother's voice softened. What did they tell you? That Dad walked away from a dream job, from financial security, from everything. He walked away from a life in Italy, Carmen said gently. From 70-hour work weeks, from missing your childhood. Your father made his choice, sweetheart, and he never regretted it. But you and Dad, the divorce, was it because of money? It was because we were different people who wanted different things, Carmen said firmly. Your father loved you and your brother more than anything. I loved you more than anything. But we didn't love each other enough to make it work. That's not your fault, Lewis. That's not anyone's fault. Lewis felt tears building. I just found out Dad sacrificed his whole career for me. Your father sacrificed nothing, Carmen said, her voice strong. He chose. There's a difference. He chose being your dad over being a Ferrari engineer. And if you asked him today if he'd make the same choice, what do you think he'd say? He'd say yes. Every single time. Carmen paused. Why is Ferrari calling you? Lewis? They want me to drive for them. His mother was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you want? I don't know anymore. I thought I wanted to stay at Mercedes, finish my career where I built my legacy. But Mom, I feel invisible there, like I'm furniture they're waiting to replace. Then maybe it's time to be somewhere that sees you, Carmen said simply. Life's too short to spend it with people who've stopped appreciating you. Trust me. I learned that lesson the hard way. After hanging up, Lewis couldn't sleep again. He got dressed at 2 a.m. and drove to the Mercedes factory. His security pass still worked at night. The building was empty, just cleaning staff and night security. He walked through the silent hallways to the trophy room. 7 World Championship trophies gleamed under soft lighting. His race suits from each championship season hung on the walls. Photos of victories covered every surface. It was a shrine to Lewis Hamilton's greatness, and he felt nothing looking at it. He remembered each championship, the joy, the tears, the overwhelming emotion of achieving what seemed impossible. But that was then. What about now? What about tomorrow? Lewis stood before his 2020 championship trophy, the year he'd matched Schumacher's record of 7 titles. He remembered the weight of history, the pride, the sense of completion. Now, it just felt like pressure, like proof that his best days were behind him. He pulled out his phone and texted Matteo, "Can you meet this week?" The reply came instantly, despite the hour. "Absolutely. When?" "Tomorrow. I'll fly to Milan in the morning. We'll send a car to meet you. To Lewis. Thank you for giving us this chance." Lewis looked at his trophies one last time. 7 silver crowns that had defined a decade of his life. Then he walked out of the Mercedes trophy room and didn't look back. The next morning, Lewis flew to Milan on a commercial flight. First class, but still commercial. He wanted anonymity, wanted time to think without his usual entourage. A discreet black car met him at Malpensa Airport. The driver spoke little English but smiled warmly. They drove south through Italian countryside, brown fields under gray December skies. An hour later, the car turned through gates Lewis had only seen in photographs. The Ferrari factory at Maranello rose before him like a cathedral to speed. Red. Everything was red. Matteo Castellani waited at the main entrance. He was smaller than Lewis expected. Maybe 5'8", with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a simple suit, not team gear. He looked more like a professor than a racing executive. "Lewis." Matteo's handshake was warm and firm. "Welcome home." "I haven't signed anything yet," Lewis said with a small smile. "You're Anthony Hamilton's son," Matteo replied. "That makes this your home regardless." They walked through security and into the factory. It was quieter than Lewis expected. Most staff had gone home for the evening. Their footsteps echoed on polished floors. "I want to show you something before we talk business," Matteo said. He led Lewis down a corridor lined with photographs. Ferrari's history in images. Enzo Ferrari himself, stern and visionary. Champions in red. Ascari, Lauda, Schumacher, Raikkonen, Vettel. And they stopped at a small door marked Archivio Heritage. Matteo unlocked it and flipped on lights. The room was intimate, maybe 20 feet square. Glass cases held artifacts from Ferrari's history. Enzo's personal items, historic race suits, letters and documents. And on the far wall, in a beautiful frame, hung 3 sheets of paper. Lewis walked closer, and his breath caught. His father's aerodynamic sketches from 1994. The ones Anthony had shown him in the garage. But these were originals, the copies he'd submitted to Ferrari during his interview. "You kept them," Lewis whispered. "We keep everything that matters," Matteo said softly. "These designs were revolutionary for their time. Some of the concepts your father proposed, we didn't implement until 10 years later." Lewis traced his fingers along the glass, looking at his father's handwriting, the careful calculations. "Why?" Lewis asked. "Why keep the work of someone who turned you down?" Matteo stood beside him, also looking at the sketches. "Because your father taught us something that day. He taught us that some things matter more than racing, more than winning, more than glory." Matteo's voice was thick with emotion. "He taught us that love, real, sacrificial love, is the only thing worth choosing when everything else is on the line." Matteo turned to Lewis. "Ferrari has made mistakes over the years. We've been arrogant, chaotic, political. We've driven away champions and wasted opportunities. But we've never forgotten Anthony Hamilton walking away from us, because his son mattered more than his dreams. That's the spirit we want to reclaim. That's why we want you here." Louis couldn't speak. Tears rolled down his face as he stared at his father's work, preserved and honored for 29 years. "Come," Matteo said gently. "There's someone who wants to meet you." They walked deeper into the Ferrari facility, through corridors Louis had never seen. Everything felt sacred here, historic, like walking through a cathedral built for speed. Matteo stopped at an oak door and knocked softly. "Avanti!" a voice called from inside. The office was warm and masculine. Leather chairs, wooden desk, walls covered with Ferrari history. Behind the desk sat Frédéric Vasseur, Ferrari's team principal. Next to him stood a distinguished older man in an impeccable suit. "Lewis Hamilton," the older man said, extending his hand. "John Elkann. Thank you for coming." Louis shook hands with Ferrari's chairman, momentarily stunned. This wasn't just a team meeting. This was the top of the organization. "Please, sit." Elkann gestured to the chairs. Louis sat. His heart hammered. This felt significant in a way Mercedes meetings never had. "Matteo told us about your father," Elkann began, "about 1994. I was 19 years old then, just beginning to understand this company my family controls. I never knew that story." "Neither did I," Louis admitted, "until a week ago." Frédéric leaned forward. "Louis, we're not here to pressure you. We're here to tell you what Ferrari represents to us, what it could represent to you." "I'm listening." Elkann spoke carefully, choosing his words. "Ferrari is more than a racing team. It's a family, a philosophy. We make mistakes, many mistakes. But we're Italian, we're passionate, sometimes we're chaotic. But we never forget who believed in us. And your father believed in Ferrari enough to interview here, to bring us his innovations, even though he walked away. We want to honor that," Frédéric added, "not with a symbolic gesture, with a genuine partnership. We want you here, Louis, because you're still one of the fastest drivers in the world, because you have fire left, because you deserve a team that sees your future, not just your past." Louis felt emotion rising. "How do you know I have fire left? I'm 38. I haven't won a race in 2 years." "Because fire doesn't die from age," Elkann said simply. "It dies from being smothered. And I think Mercedes has been smothering yours for too long." The words hit hard because they were true. "Think about it," Frédéric said. "No, don't answer now. But know this, if you come to Ferrari, you come as a partner, as a leader, not as a marketing asset or a transitioning legend, as Lewis Hamilton, racing driver, who still has worlds to conquer." The meeting lasted another hour. They discussed vision, philosophy, what Ferrari wanted to build. They didn't discuss money or contract length or commercial obligations. They discussed passion. When Louis left Maranello that evening, his head spun with possibilities. The drive back to Milan airport felt like floating. But reality waited in England. 3 days later, Louis attended a Mercedes sponsor gala in London. Black tie, champagne, 100-pound canapes. The elite of motorsport and business all gathered to celebrate the Mercedes-AMG Petronas partnership. Louis wore his tuxedo and his camera-ready smile. He shook hands with CEOs and posed for photos with their wives. Everyone wanted a piece of Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion. Nobody asked how he was doing. Nobody asked if he was happy. They just wanted proximity to greatness. During the speeches, Toto took the stage. He talked about Mercedes's glorious history, the championships, the dominance, the future. And we're thrilled to continue building that future with young talent like Andrea Petrov, Toto announced. Andrea represents everything Mercedes stands for: innovation, excellence, the next generation of racing. Applause filled the ballroom. Andrea stood and waved, gracious and humble. Toto continued. Of course, we're also grateful to have Lewis Hamilton's experience and guidance as we transition into this new era. Experience, guidance, transition. But Lewis heard what wasn't being said. He heard, "We're moving on. You're the past helping us build the future that doesn't include you." After the speeches, Lewis found himself alone on a balcony overlooking the Thames. London glittered below, cold and expensive and beautiful. Quite a speech. Sophie Brennan's voice came from behind him. Lewis turned, surprised. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I'm not. I was leaving dinner nearby and saw the event." She joined him at the railing. "Saw you sneak out here. Thought you might need a friendly face." "That obvious?" "Only to people who know what it looks like when someone realizes they're being managed out." Sophie's voice was kind, but honest. "Toto basically announced your retirement timeline without actually saying it." Lewis nodded slowly. "Experience and guidance. I'd like I'm already a consultant instead of a driver." "Are you really surprised?" "No," Lewis admitted. "But hearing it said out loud still hurts." They stood in silence, watching boats move on the dark river. "Can I tell you something?" Sophie said. "Something I didn't mention last time we talked?" "Please." "Remember Brazil 2023? When you had that brilliant race in the wet, came from 15th to 3rd? Lewis remembered. One of his best drives of the season. Pure instinct and skill. In the debrief after, you suggested setup changes based on what you'd learned about the car's behavior in wet conditions. Really specific, technical stuff about brake bias and differential settings. I remember. James said they'd look into it. They never did, Sophie said quietly. I was still there then, but I watched them file your feedback in a folder and never open it again. You know why? Lewis shook his head. Because the engineering director said, Hamilton's driving at that level is an outlier. We can't design a car around peak Hamilton anymore. We need to design it for what he'll be in 2 years when he's 40. The words were a punch to the gut. They're already designing for my decline, Lewis whispered. They have been for over a year, Sophie confirmed. They're not trying to maximize your potential. They're trying to minimize how much your declining speed will hurt their results. It's risk management, Lewis. Corporate strategy. It's not racing. Lewis gripped the railing, knuckles white. I've won them 7 championships, made them billions, and they're treating me like I'm already finished. Because to them, oh, you are, Sophie said sadly. You're 38. In their spreadsheets and projections, you're a sunset asset. They're being smart, business-wise, but they're not being loyal. They're not being family. What should I do? Sophie looked at him. What do you want to do? Lewis thought about Maranello, about his father's sketches on the wall, about Elkan and Frederick talking about partnership and passion, about red instead of silver. I think I want to feel like a racing driver again, Lewis said. Not a brand ambassador, not a heritage asset, just a driver. Then be a driver, Sophie said simply. Go somewhere that wants you to drive, not just to exist. Inside, the gala continued. Speeches about the future. Andrea Petrov's future. Mercedes' future. A future that no longer included Lewis Hamilton as anything more than a footnote. T. Lewis pulled out his phone. Texted Matteo, We need to talk seriously. How soon can we meet again? The reply came quickly. I'm in London tomorrow for other business. Dinner? Lewis typed back, Yes, And Matteo? I think I'm ready to discuss terms. 3 dots appeared. Then, red suits you, Louis. I knew it would. Louis pocketed his phone and looked at Sophie. Thank you for being honest when no one else would. I just told you what you already knew, Sophie said. Sometimes we need permission to admit what our hearts have been saying all along. The next evening, Louis met Matteo at a quiet Italian restaurant in Knightsbridge. They sat in a private room, away from cameras and phones. Matteo brought a folder. Inside were not contracts, but photographs. Your father at the factory gates in 1994, Matteo showed him. Security kept this photo. He stood there for 11 minutes after leaving, just looking back. Louis studied his father's face in the grainy image. Anthony looked young, maybe 35, sad but resolved. He loved Ferrari, Louis said softly. Even walking away, he loved it. And Ferrari never stopped respecting him, Matteo replied. That's why we're here, Louis. Not to sign a champion, but to complete a story that began 29 years ago when your father chose love over ambition. Tell me honestly, Louis said. Am I fast enough still? Or is this sentiment? Matteo's eyes blazed. You are still elite. Maybe not at your absolute peak, but elite. The question isn't whether you're fast enough. It's whether you're willing to fight again. Whether you're willing to be uncomfortable. Whether you're willing to fail gloriously rather than fade comfortably. Louis felt something ignite in his chest. Something that had been dormant. Mercedes is comfortable, he said. Comfortable is death for a racing driver, Matteo replied. Ferrari is chaos and passion and risk. But it's alive, Louis. It's so alive. They talked for 3 hours. About vision, about challenges, about what success would look like. Finally, Matteo said, I can't offer you a contract tonight. But I can offer you a promise. If you come to Ferrari, we will honor your talent, your father's sacrifice, and the fire you still carry. We will race with you, not manage your decline. Louis extended his hand across the table. Then let's race. They shook hands. No contracts, no lawyers. Just 2 men honoring a debt, 29 years old. That night, and Louis sat in his apartment writing an email he'd been avoiding. Dear Toto, we need to talk about my future. More importantly, we need to talk about whether I still have one at Mercedes. Regards, Louis. He hit send before he could overthink it. Outside his window, London sparkled, silver and gray and beautiful. But Louis's heart beat red. The email to Toto sat in his sent folder like a loaded gun. Louis stared at his phone, waiting for the inevitable response. It came at 6:47 a.m. My office, today, 2 p.m. We need to discuss this face-to-face. Toto. No warmth, no question mark, just a command. Louis texted back, I'll be there. But first, he had somewhere else to be. At 10 a.m., Louis drove to his father's house in Stevenage. Anthony was in the garage, as always, tinkering with an old motorcycle engine. Some habits never died. Dad, Louis said from the doorway. I need to show you something. They drove together to a private airfield outside London. A small jet waited, not Louis's usual plane. This one had been arranged by Ferrari, discreet and unmarked. Where are we going? Anthony asked, confused but trusting. Maranello, Louis said. There's something you need to see. His father's face went pale. Louis, trust me, Dad. Please. The flight took 90 minutes. Anthony sat quiet, looking out the window, lost in memories of a place he'd visited once, 29 years ago, and never forgotten. A car met them at Bologna Airport. The same quiet driver who'd collected Louis before. They drove through Italian countryside, turning brown with winter. When the Ferrari factory appeared on the horizon, Anthony's breath caught. "So it looks exactly the same," he whispered. "The gates, the buildings, like time stopped." Matteo waited at the entrance. He walked directly to Anthony and extended his hand. "Mr. Hamilton, I'm Matteo Castellani. I was 23 years old when you came here in 1994. I was the junior assistant who brought you coffee during your interview." Anthony's eyes widened. "You remember?" "I've never forgotten," Matteo said simply. "Come, please, both of you." He led them through the factory. Anthony walked slowly, taking everything in. Engineers called out greetings to Louis, surprised to see him. But Matteo kept moving, leading them to that same small room, the Heritage Archive. Matteo unlocked the door and held it open. Anthony stepped inside. His eyes went immediately to the wall, to his sketches, framed and lit beautifully. He stood frozen, staring. "You kept them," Anthony finally managed, his voice breaking. "After 29 years, you kept my work." "Your work was brilliant," Matteo said quietly. "These concepts influenced our car design for a decade. You should have been here, Anthony. You should have been part of Ferrari's story." "I made my choice," Anthony said, tears streaming down his face. "And it was the right choice," Matteo replied, "but it was also a sacrifice. And Ferrari never forgets sacrifice." John Elkann entered the room, followed by Frederick Vasseur. Anthony looked confused, overwhelmed by the attention. "Mr. Hamilton," Elkann said warmly, "I'm John Elkann. We've never met, but your name has been in Ferrari's files for 29 years. There's a note in your application file from our managing director at the time, Giuseppe Moretti." Elkann pulled out a yellowed piece of paper, carefully preserved in plastic. "May I read it?" Elkann asked. Anthony nodded, unable to speak. Elkann read, "This man loves his son more than Formula One. If his son makes it to F1, we offer him a drive. Not because of the father, because of what the father taught us. We need people who understand racing is about love, not just speed. Giuseppe Moretti, July 1994. The room fell silent. Louis looked at his father. Anthony was sobbing, one hand covering his mouth. "You've carried this for 29 years, Mr. Hamilton," Elkann continued. "The weight of that choice, the sacrifice, and we want you to know it mattered. It shaped how we think about what Ferrari should be. Family, passion, sacrifice for something greater." Frederick stepped forward. "Anthony, we can't give you back 1994. We can't undo your sacrifice, but we can honor it. We can give your son the drive you walked away from. We can make you part of Ferrari's family, the way you should have been 3 decades ago." Anthony looked at Louis, then at his framed sketches, then at these men who'd remembered him for nearly 30 years. "I don't understand," Anthony whispered. "Why does any of this matter now?" "Because Ferrari is not just about winning races," Elkann said. "It's about honoring the people who believed in us. You believed in us enough to apply. Believed in us enough that walking away broke something in you. We saw it in the security photo. You standing outside our gates, looking back. That's belief, Anthony. That's love." Matteo added, "And when we heard Louis might be available, I remembered you. I remembered that day. I told these men your story, and we all agreed. If we could sign Lewis Hamilton and honor Anthony Hamilton in the same moment, that's what Ferrari was built for." Louis put his arm around his father's shoulders. Anthony leaned into his son, crying freely now. "I never told you because I didn't want you to feel obligated," Anthony said to Louis. I didn't want Ferrari to be about my lost dream. I wanted it to be about your earned opportunity. It's both, Dad, Louis said softly. It's always been both. You gave me the opportunity. Now I get to give you closure. Frederick spoke gently. Anthony, if Louis signs with Ferrari, you'll be part of our family too. Not as the employee, not as leverage, but as the man who taught us what matters most. We'd be honored if you'd join us for races, and if you'd bring your engineering insights to our development meetings, if you'd let us learn from the mind that created these designs. Anthony looked at his sketches on the wall, at these men who'd kept his work, at his son who'd brought him here. I'm 68 years old, Anthony said, wiping his eyes. My best engineering days are behind me. Wisdom has no age limit, Elkan replied. And besides, you'd be surprised how many of your 1994 concepts we still haven't fully explored. You were ahead of your time, Anthony. Maybe you still are. They spent 2 hours in Maranello, walking through the factory, meeting engineers, seeing next year's car in development, red and purposeful and aggressive. Anthony touched the car's bodywork reverently. I dreamed of this, he admitted. In 1994, I dreamed of my hands on a Ferrari race car. Now your son will drive one, Matteo said. Perhaps that's better than building it. Perhaps that's the dream completed, not abandoned. As they prepared to leave, Frederick pulled Louis aside privately. Your meeting with Toto is in 3 hours, Frederick said. Somehow he knew. Whatever he offers, whatever he says, remember what you felt today. Remember why you brought your father here. That feeling? That's what we're offering. Not just a contract, but a homecoming. Louis nodded. I understand. Do you? Frederick looked at him intently. Because Mercedes will offer you security, safety, the comfortable path. Ferrari is offering you risk, uncertainty, the chance to fail spectacularly or succeed gloriously. There's no middle ground here, Louis. That's not who we are. I know, Louis said. Oh, and I think that's exactly what I need. The flight back to England was quiet. Anthony stared out the window, processing everything. Finally, he spoke. If you do this, if you go to Ferrari, it won't be easy. They're chaotic, emotional, Italian. I know. Mercedes is stable, reliable. They'll take care of you until retirement. I know that too. Anthony turned to face his son. But Mercedes has forgotten what it feels like to truly want you. And Louis, you deserve to be somewhere that wakes up every morning wanting you there. Not tolerating you, not managing you, wanting you. Ferrari wants me, Louis said. Ferrari needs you, Anthony corrected. They need what you represent. They need the racing driver, not the brand ambassador. They need the fighter, see, not the legend coasting to retirement. Are you saying I should do it? Anthony smiled through fresh tears. I'm saying I walked away from Ferrari in 1994 because you were more important than my dreams. Maybe now it's time you walk toward Ferrari because your dreams are more important than your comfort. They landed at 1:15 p.m. Louis dropped his father home and drove straight to Brackley, to face Toto, to face the comfortable path he was about to reject. Outside his window, London sparkled, silver and gray and beautiful. But Louis's heart beat red, and for the first time in years, he knew exactly why he was racing. Not for championships or records or legacy, but for the feeling his father must have felt in 1994, standing outside Ferrari's gates. The feeling of loving something so much that walking away nearly broke you. And Louis wasn't going to walk away. Not anymore. He was walking home. The Mercedes facility looked different today, less impressive, more like a corporate office than a racing team. Glass and steel and silver, so much silver. Lewis parked his car and sat for a moment, gathering himself. His phone buzzed with a text from his father. "Tell the truth. That's all you owe them." Simple advice, hard to follow. Lewis walked through the main entrance at 1:58 p.m. The receptionist smiled warmly. "Mr. Hamilton, Mr. Wolf is expecting you in his office." The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than usual. Lewis watched the numbers climb, each floor a memory. This building had been his second home for 11 years. Now it felt like a museum. Toto's assistant waved him straight through. "Go ahead, Lewis. He's waiting." Lewis opened the door. Toto sat behind his desk, reading something on his computer. He didn't look up immediately. A power move Lewis had seen him use countless times with drivers, sponsors, journalists. Finally, Toto closed his laptop and looked up. "Lewis, sit." Lewis sat in the leather chair across from Toto's desk. The same chair where they'd celebrated championships, where they'd strategized victories, where they'd built an empire together. "Your email was cryptic," Toto said, his voice neutral. "You want to discuss your future, so let's discuss." "I'm considering other options," Lewis said simply. Toto's expression didn't change. "Ferrari." It wasn't a question. Toto always knew everything. "Yes." "They've contacted you." "Yes." Toto leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "What are they offering?" "It's not about money. Toto." "Everything is about money eventually, Lewis. What's the number?" "There is no number yet. We haven't discussed contracts." Toto's eyebrow raised. "You're meeting with Ferrari without discussing terms. That's not like you." "Maybe I'm tired of everything being about terms," Lewis said quietly. "Maybe I'm tired of racing being reduced to spreadsheets and revenue projections." "Is this about Andrea?" Toto asked directly. "Because if you feel threatened by a young driver—" "I'm not threatened," Lewis interrupted. "Andrea is talented. He deserves his opportunity." "But yes, Toto, this is about Andrea. It's about how you light up around him the way you used to light up around me. It's about resources shifting. And it's about me feeling like I'm being managed toward retirement rather than supported toward victory." "That's not fair," Toto said, his voice cooling. "We've given you everything. The best car we could build. The best team. The support." "You've given me a car designed for my decline," Lewis said flatly. "Not for my peak. You're engineering for who I'll be at 40, not who I am at 38. Toto's face hardened. "Who told you that? Does it matter? Is it true?" Silence filled the office. "We're being realistic," Toto finally said. "You're 38 years old, Lewis. You're still excellent. But you're not peak Hamilton anymore. We have to plan for that reality." "And that's the difference," Lewis said, standing. "Ferrari isn't planning for my decline. They're betting on what I have left. Or they're willing to risk failure for the chance of glory. You're just trying to minimize how much I'll hurt your results when I inevitably slow down." "So leave," Toto said coldly. "Walk away from everything we built. Chase nostalgia at Ferrari. See how that works out for you." Lewis stopped at the door. Toto's words stung, but they also clarified everything. "It's not nostalgia," Lewis said quietly. "It's remembering what racing felt like before it became a business, before I became a revenue stream instead of a driver." "You think Ferrari is different?" Toto laughed bitterly. "They're a corporation too, Lewis. They'll use you just like everyone else." "Maybe," Lewis acknowledged, "but at least they'll use me as a racing driver." not as a brand ambassador slowly being phased out. He reached for the door handle. "See, Lewis." Toto's voice stopped him. Softer now, almost human. "We can match any offer, financially, resources, whatever you need." Lewis turned back. Toto looked older suddenly, tired. "Can you match passion?" Lewis asked. "Can you match feeling wanted? Can you match waking up excited to race instead of obligated to perform?" Toto said nothing. "I didn't think so," Lewis said. "Toto, you gave me 7 championships. I'll never forget that. But somewhere along the way, we stopped being partners and became employer and employee. I stopped being Lewis and became Hamilton. Asset number 44. "That's business," Toto said. "Exactly," Lewis replied. "That's business. Ferrari is offering me family. Maybe it's naive. Maybe it'll blow up in my face. But I'd rather fail trying to feel alive than succeed feeling nothing." "You're making a mistake," Toto said. "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." Lewis opened the door and walked out of Toto Wolff's office for what he knew would be the last time as teammates. In the elevator, his hands shook. He just walked away from security, from the known, from everything safe and comfortable. His phone rang. Matteo. "How did it go?" the Italian asked. "I think I just quit Mercedes," Lewis said, his voice unsteady. "How do you feel?" Lewis thought about it, scared, excited, uncertain, free. "Alive," Lewis finally answered. "I feel alive." "Good," Matteo said warmly. "That's the first requirement for driving a Ferrari. Now, when can you come back to Maranello? We have a contract to discuss, and a seat fitting to schedule." And, Lewis?" "Yes?" "Welcome home." Lewis hung up and walked out of the Mercedes building. He didn't look back at the trophy cases or the championship banners or the 11 years of history. He looked forward, toward red, toward risk, toward feeling like a racing driver again instead of a corporate asset. His phone buzzed with a text from his father. "Proud of you, son. Whatever happens next." Lewis smiled and started his car. Outside, England was gray and cold, but inside, Lewis Hamilton burned red and hot and absolutely certain. He was going home. 3 months of secret negotiations followed. Lawyers, contracts, release clauses from Mercedes that cost Ferrari millions. But through it all, Lewis felt lighter than he had in years. The announcement was scheduled for February 1st, 2024. Lewis woke that morning in Monaco, yet watching the sunrise over the Mediterranean. His phone had been off for 12 hours. Ferrari's communication team insisted on total silence before the reveal. At 6 a.m., he turned it back on. 37 missed calls. Over 200 texts. His social media was exploding. Someone had leaked it. The news was everywhere. Lewis Hamilton to Ferrari. 7-time world champion joins Scuderia for 2025. Lewis's hands trembled as he scrolled through the reactions. Shock, disbelief, excitement, criticism. He's too old. Ferrari's desperate. End of an era at Mercedes. This changes everything. His phone rang. Matteo. "I'm sorry, Lewis. We don't know how it leaked. We wanted you to control the narrative." "It's okay," Lewis said, surprised by his own calmness. "The world knows, and that's what matters. Ferrari is releasing an official statement in 30 minutes. You should call your family first." Lewis called his father. Anthony answered on the first ring. "I saw the news," Anthony said, his voice thick with emotion. "Is it real?" "It's real, Dad. I'm going to drive for Ferrari." Silence. Then his father sobbing. "I'm so proud of you," Anthony managed. 29 years. 29 years, and you're finally bringing us full circle." "We're bringing us full circle," Lewis corrected. This is your dream too, Dad. No, son. My dream was always just watching you be happy. And if Ferrari makes you happy, then I couldn't ask for more. Lewis called his mother next. Carmen answered immediately. Lewis Hamilton, she said in that voice she used when she was trying not to cry. You really did it. I did. Are you scared? Terrified, Lewis admitted, but also more excited than I've been in years. Good, Carmen said firmly. Fear means you still care. When you stop being scared, that's when you should worry. At 8 a.m. Monaco time, Ferrari's official announcement went live. The video opened with black and white footage of Enzo Ferrari himself, speaking in Italian. Subtitles appeared. We do not create our cars for comfort. We create them for passion. Then color footage of every Ferrari champion: Lauda, Schumacher, Raikkonen, Vettel. Then a new image: Lewis Hamilton in Ferrari red, smiling genuinely, standing in front of the Maranello factory. His voiceover began, I've spent my entire career chasing perfection, but somewhere along the way, I forgot to chase joy. Ferrari reminded me that racing isn't just about winning. It's about feeling alive. The video showed Anthony's 1994 sketches, now hanging in Ferrari's Heritage Archive. Lewis's voice continued. My father sacrificed his dream of working at Ferrari so I could chase mine of driving in Formula One. 29 years later, I get to honor that sacrifice by finally wearing red. Not because I have to, but because I choose to. The final shot. Lewis in full Ferrari race suit, helmet under his arm, standing next to the SF-25, Ferrari's 2025 car. I'm Lewis Hamilton, and I'm coming home. The internet exploded. Within an hour, the announcement video had 10 million views. Within 3 hours, 20 million. It became the most watched F1 announcement in history. Social media couldn't process it. Hamilton in red looks wrong, but also so right. Mercedes in shambles. This is the most exciting thing to happen to F1 in years. He's going to regret this. No, he's not. He's going to be reborn. Pundits weighed in immediately. Sky Sports did a 2-hour special. Journalists called it everything from brilliant to career suicide. Martin Brundle tweeted, bold move, risky move. But maybe that's exactly what Lewis needed. Sometimes legends need one more chapter. Max Verstappen posted, welcome to the fight, Lewis. See you in red. Charles Leclerc, Lewis's future Ferrari teammate, posted a photo of himself in red with the caption, room for one more? And let's make history together. Mercedes's response was cold and corporate. We thank Lewis Hamilton for 11 incredible years and wish him well in his future endeavors. No emotion. No acknowledgement of 7 championships together. Just a business statement. Toto didn't comment publicly. Lewis spent the day doing back-to-back interviews from his Monaco apartment. Every journalist asked the same questions. Why Ferrari? Why now? Aren't you worried about the risk? To each one, Lewis gave the same honest answer. Because I stopped feeling like a racing driver and started feeling like a brand. Ferrari reminded me who I really am. That evening, Lewis's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Hello? Lewis. The voice was familiar, German accent. It's Michael. Lewis's heart stopped. Michael Schumacher Jr. Mick. I wanted to call personally, Mick continued. My father always said Ferrari either breaks you or makes you immortal. There's no in-between. He said driving for Ferrari was like being in love. It hurt more than anything, but also meant more than anything. Did he have any advice? Lewis asked quietly. Michael Schumacher had won 5 championships with Ferrari. If anyone understood this journey, it was him. He said Ferrari will ask for everything. your time, your energy, your soul. But if you give it willingly, if you give it with passion, Ferrari gives back tenfold. It makes you more than a champion. It makes you eternal. Thank you, Mick. That means everything. One more thing, Mick said. My father kept notes from his Ferrari years, lessons learned. I'd like to share them with you. Maybe over dinner before testing starts? I'd be honored. After hanging up, Lewis stood on his balcony watching Monaco's harbor. Yachts bobbed in the water. The city hummed with wealth and comfort. He thought about his father standing outside Ferrari's gates in 1994, unable to walk away easily. He thought about Matteo keeping those sketches for 29 years. He thought about Giuseppe Moretti's note. If his son makes it to F1, we offer him the drive. He thought about red, the color of passion, the color of risk, the color of racing stripped down to its purest form. Lewis pulled out his phone and texted his father. We did it, Dad. We're finally Ferrari. Anthony replied immediately, No, son. You're finally you again. That's what matters. Lewis looked at the message and smiled. Tomorrow, the critics would keep criticizing, and the doubters would keep doubting. The journalists would keep questioning whether a 39-year-old driver joining Ferrari was genius or madness. But tonight, for the first time in years, Lewis Hamilton felt something he'd almost forgotten existed. Purpose. Not the purpose of winning championships or breaking records or securing his legacy, but the simple, pure purpose of racing because you love racing, of choosing passion over comfort, of honoring your father's sacrifice by finally taking the opportunity he never could. Lewis looked down at his wrist. He wore a simple leather bracelet his father had given him when he won his first championship. On it, engraved in tiny letters, Love over fear. Always. Anthony had chosen love. Love for his son. Over his fear of financial struggle. Now Lewis was choosing love. Love for racing. Over his fear of failure. The world thought this was about Lewis Hamilton joining Ferrari. But really, it was about Lewis Hamilton finding himself again. And he was painted red. The months between the announcement and Lewis's first Ferrari test flew by in a blur of preparation. Seat fittings, simulator sessions, learning Italian, basic phrases that made the Maranello engineers laugh at his pronunciation. But through it all, something felt incomplete. Like there was a piece of the story Lewis didn't yet understand. It was late January 2025, 3 weeks before testing began, when Matteo called. Lewis, can you come to Maranello? There's something I need to show you. Something I didn't tell you during that first phone call. Lewis felt his stomach tighten. What do you mean? Please, just come. And some things can only be said in person. 2 days later, Lewis stood once again in Ferrari's Heritage Archive. But this time, Matteo led him to a different section. A locked cabinet in the corner. What I'm about to show you, Matteo said carefully, has been kept secret for 30 years. Only 3 people in Ferrari's history have known about it. Giuseppe Moretti, our managing director who hired in 1994, John Elkann, and me. Matteo unlocked the cabinet and withdrew a thin file folder, yellowed with age. On the tab, handwritten, Hamilton, Anthony, 1994, special instructions. He handed it to Lewis. Inside was a single piece of paper, a memo dated July 28, 1994. Written in Italian with an English translation clipped to it. Lewis read, Memo, strictly confidential, from Giuseppe Moretti, Managing Director, to Future Ferrari Leadership. Date, 28th July 1994. Subject: the Hamilton Promise. Today, I interviewed Anthony Hamilton for our lead aerodynamicist position. He is the most talented self-taught engineer I have ever encountered. His designs are 15 years ahead of current thinking. We offered him the position. Excellent salary. Full benefits. The opportunity to work on Formula One cars at the highest level. He declined. His reason: he has a 9-year-old son who races karts. He cannot miss the boys' races. He must be present for his son's journey. I asked Mr. Hamilton his son's name. Lewis, he said. Lewis Hamilton. And he's going to be a Formula One champion one day. I know it the way I know my own name. I watched Anthony Hamilton walk out of our factory. I watched him stand at our gates for 11 minutes, looking back at the building. I saw a man torn between two dreams, but I also saw a man who chose correctly. Therefore, I make this promise. If Lewis Hamilton, Anthony's son, reaches Formula One, Ferrari will offer him a drive. Not as charity, not as sentiment, but as recognition that some debts transcend business. Anthony Hamilton loved his son more than he loved Ferrari. That is the kind of love that builds champions. That is the kind of sacrifice that Ferrari was founded to honor. This is not a casual promise. This is a binding commitment that I expect all future Ferrari leadership to honor. Specific instructions. Monitor Lewis Hamilton's racing career from karting forward. If he reaches F1, regardless of which team signs him first, maintain contact when the opportunity arises, when his contract allows, and when timing is right. Extend an offer, do not reveal this promise until he is signed. Honor the father by giving the son what he deserves. We are not signing Lewis Hamilton the driver. We are honoring Anthony Hamilton the father. And those are the people Ferrari was built for. People who understand that racing is about love, not just speed. This promise stands until fulfilled or until Lewis Hamilton's career ends. I will not live to see this promise completed. But whoever reads this memo in the future, do not break this promise. The honor of Ferrari depends on it. Signed, Giuseppe Moretti, Managing Director, Scuderia Ferrari. Lewis's hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the paper. He knew, Lewis whispered. He knew about me when I was 9 years old. Matteo nodded, tears in his eyes. Giuseppe died in 2019. But he made us swear, every managing director, every chairman who came after him, that we would keep this promise, that we would find you when the time was right. So this wasn't... Lewis couldn't finish the sentence. This wasn't opportunism, Matteo said gently. This wasn't about signing a champion to win races. This was about completing a promise made to your father 30 years ago. This was about Giuseppe Moretti looking at Anthony Hamilton and seeing something pure, something that racing should be built on. Lewis sank into a chair, the memo clutched in his hands. Ferrari has been watching me since I was 9 years old. Not actively scouting, Matteo explained, but yes, Giuseppe kept a file. Every karting result, every junior formula race, every F1 victory. He never met you. But he watched your career like a proud grandfather watching his grandson. Matteo pulled out another folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, race results, photos, a complete archive of Lewis's career from age 9 to present. When you won your first F1 championship in 2008, Giuseppe called me into his office. I was senior heritage director by then. He was 83 years old, dying of cancer. He made me read his 1994 memo out loud. Then he said, "The boy did it. Anthony's son became a champion. Now we wait for the right moment." "Why didn't you contact me then?" Lewis asked. "Because you were happy at McLaren. Then you moved to Mercedes and won championships. Giuseppe said the promise wasn't about convenience. It was about timing. It's about waiting until you needed Ferrari as much as Ferrari needed to honor the promise. "So you waited 13 years, Louis said. "Waited until I was struggling, until Mercedes stopped valuing me." "We waited until the timing was right," Matteo corrected. "Until you were ready to hear this story. Until you were ready to understand what it meant." Louis looked at the memo again, at Giuseppe Moretti's signature, at the date, July 28, 1994. "My father's interview was July 28th? "Yes." "That's my birthday," Louis said quietly. "I turned 9 years old that day." Matteo's eyes widened. He hadn't known. "While my dad was in Maranello turning down his dream job," Louis continued, "I was at home having a birthday party, probably eating cake, probably playing with friends, and never knowing what he was giving up for me." The weight of it crushed Louis, his father's sacrifice, Giuseppe's promise. 30 years of Ferrari holding on to a commitment made to a man who chose love over ambition. "Does my dad know?" Louis asked. "About the promise?" "No," Matteo said. "Giuseppe wanted it kept secret until you signed. He said Anthony made his choice without expectation of reward. The promise should be honored the same way." Louis stood abruptly. "I need to tell him. I need him to know that his choice, that everything he gave up, it mattered." Ferrari remembered. For 30 years, they remembered. "Then tell him," Matteo said warmly. "Tell him that his sacrifice didn't just raise a champion. It earned the respect of an entire organization. Tell him that Giuseppe Moretti, a man he met for 3 hours in 1994, cared enough to bind future generations of Ferrari leadership to honor him." Louis looked at Giuseppe's memo one more time. "We are not signing Lewis Hamilton, the driver. We are honoring Anthony Hamilton, the father." "Can I keep this?" Louis asked. "It's yours," Matteo said. "It was always meant for you. The promise is fulfilled now. The debt is paid. But the story, your father's story, Giuseppe's story, that lives forever." Louis carefully folded the memo and put it in his jacket pocket, right over his heart. "When does my father arrive for testing?" Louis asked. "He flies in 2 days before your first test session. We've arranged everything: hotel, paddock access, garage credentials. He'll be part of the Ferrari family officially." "Good," Louis said, "because I need to show him this. I need him to understand that what he thought was sacrifice was actually prophecy." Giuseppe knew. Somehow he knew that my father's choice would matter, that it would mean something. Matteo smiled. "Love always means something, Louis. Always. That's what your father taught Ferrari in 1994. That's what Ferrari is teaching you now in 2025. Louis left Maranello that evening carrying more than just a promise. He carried the weight of 30 years of institutional honor. The proof that some organizations still valued love over profit, sacrifice over convenience. He thought about his father standing at Ferrari's gates in 1994, looking back. He thought about Giuseppe Moretti watching Louis's career from afar, waiting to fulfill a promise. He thought about all the years, all the races, all the victories that led to this moment. And this wasn't just about Lewis Hamilton joining Ferrari. This was about a promise kept, a father honored, a sacrifice recognized. This was about love, 30 years of love, finally coming full circle. And it was painted red. Deep, eternal, Ferrari red. February 2025. Fiorano Circuit, Ferrari's private test track. The air was cold and crisp, the sky a pale Italian blue. Lewis stood in the Ferrari garage wearing red for the first time as an official driver. The SF-25 gleamed under the lights. Aggressive, beautiful, Red. Lewis ran his hand along the car's bodywork, carbon fiber smooth as glass. The prancing horse logo reflected in the shine. This was real. After 11 months of negotiation and anticipation, this was finally real. Nervous? Charles Leclerc appeared beside him, already in his race suit. Terrified, Lewis admitted. Good, Charles grinned. That means you still care. I was terrified my first day, too. Ferrari does that to you. It never stops doing that to you. The garage hummed with activity. Engineers checking data, mechanics making final adjustments. Everyone moved with purpose, with passion. It felt different from Mercedes, less corporate, more alive. Frederick Vasseur walked over, placing a hand on Lewis's shoulder. Your father arrived an hour ago. He's in the hospitality suite. Matteo is showing him around. Lewis's heart swelled. He's here? Of course he's here. This is his day as much as yours. Frederick smiled. Go see him. We won't start the car without you. Lewis walked through the facility to the hospitality suite. Through the window, he saw Anthony Hamilton standing with Matteo, both men looking out at the track. His father wore a red Ferrari jacket, a gift from the team. Lewis pushed open the door. Anthony turned, and their eyes met. No words. Lewis crossed the room and pulled his father into a tight embrace. I can't believe I'm here, Anthony whispered. I can't believe we're here. Lewis pulled back and reached into his pocket. He withdrew Giuseppe Moretti's memo, now carefully preserved in a protective sleeve. Dad, I need to show you something. Something Ferrari kept secret for 30 years. Anthony took the memo with shaking hands. He read slowly, lips moving silently. Lewis watched his father's face. Confusion, then understanding, then overwhelming emotion. He promised, Anthony said, his voice breaking. Giuseppe promised to sign you before he'd even met you. He watched my entire career, Lewis said. Kept files on every race. He waited for the right moment. All because of what you did in 1994. All because you chose me over your dream. Anthony sank into a chair, still clutching the memo. I never expected anything. I never wanted Ferrari to feel obligated. It wasn't obligation, Lewis interrupted gently. It was honor. You showed them what matters most. You taught Ferrari what they'd forgotten, that racing is about love, not just speed. Giuseppe never forgot that lesson. He made sure Ferrari never forgot it either. Matteo stepped forward quietly. Anthony, may I say something? Anthony nodded, unable to speak. I was there in 1994, Matteo said. I watched you turn down that job. I watched you walk out. And I watched Giuseppe after you left. He sat in his office for an hour, just thinking. Then he wrote that memo. But he told me, that man just taught me more about Ferrari's soul than 30 years in racing ever did. Anthony wiped his eyes. I was just being a father. Exactly, Matteo said. You were being a father. And Giuseppe recognized that Ferrari, at its core, is a family. Not a corporation. Not a business. A family. You reminded him of that. A voice crackled over the radio. Lewis, we're ready when you are. Lewis looked at his father. Come with me. I want you in the garage for the first lap. They walked together to the garage, father and son, 30 years of sacrifice and love between them. The mechanics stopped working and applauded as Anthony entered. They knew the story. Everyone at Ferrari knew the story now. Lewis's race engineer, a gentle-faced Italian named Marco, greeted Anthony warmly. Mr. Hamilton, it's an honor. Your son is in excellent hands here. I know he is, Anthony said. I've waited 30 years to say that. Lewis began his pre-drive routine. Balaclava, Hans' device, helmet. Each piece of equipment felt sacred somehow. This wasn't just another test day. This was prophecy being fulfilled. He climbed into the cockpit. The seat fit perfectly. They'd done hundreds of simulator sessions, but this was different. This was the real car. Red leather, red carbon fiber, red everything. Marco leaned in. "Lewis, we're not asking you to set lap records today. We're asking you to feel the car, understand her, fall in love with her. The speed will come. The passion must come first." Lewis nodded. His heart raced faster than any race start. The mechanics pushed the car out of the garage. The Fiorano circuit stretched before him, 2.976 kilometers of hallowed ground. Schumacher had tested here. Lauda. Every Ferrari legend. Now, Lewis Hamilton. Lewis looked to his right. His father stood at the garage entrance, tears streaming down his face, one hand over his heart. Their eyes met. Anthony mouthed, "I love you, son." Lewis pointed at his father, then at his own heart. Then he keyed his radio. "Ready when you are, Marco." "Fire her up, Lewis. Welcome home." The engine exploded to life, not the hybrid whisper of the Mercedes. This was a Ferrari V6, raw, angry, purposeful. The sound reverberated through Lewis's chest, through his bones, through his soul. He pulled out of the pit lane slowly. The car felt different, more alive, more responsive. Or maybe that was just Lewis feeling alive again. First gear. Second. Now the acceleration pushed him back into the seat. Third gear through the first corner. The car gripped perfectly, rotating exactly how Lewis wanted. Fourth gear down the straight. Fifth. The engine sang. No other word for it. It sang. Lewis took the second corner, feeling the weight transfer, feeling the tires working. The car talked to him in a language he'd forgotten he knew. Not data, not telemetry, just pure mechanical communication between driver and machine. "How does she feel?" Marco's voice in his ear. Lewis couldn't speak. His throat was too tight with emotion. He accelerated through the final corners, building speed, building confidence, then across the start-finish line. One complete lap in Ferrari red. "Time?" Marco asked someone in the background. 1 minute, 2.4 seconds, came the response. Not fast, not slow, just right for a first installation lap. "Lewis?" Marco said gently. "Are you okay?" Lewis keyed the radio. His voice shook. "Marco, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I forgot," Lewis said, tears running down his face inside his helmet. "I forgot what this felt like. Racing because you love it. Not because you have to. Not because it's your job. But because every cell in your body was built for this moment." In the garage, Anthony Hamilton collapsed against Matteo, sobbing. "He's home," Anthony whispered. "My boy is finally home." Lewis completed 5 more laps, each one faster, each one more confident, but more importantly, each one more joyful. On his 6th lap, crossing the start-finish line, Lewis saw the Ferrari team lined up at the pit wall. Mechanics, engineers, team principals, all of them applauding. And in the center, wearing his red Ferrari jacket, stood Anthony Hamilton. Not an employee, not a visitor. Family. "Box this lap," Marco said. "We've seen enough." "Already?" Lewis asked, disappointed. Marco laughed. "No, Lewis. We've seen everything we needed. We've seen a driver fall in love with a car. The rest is just details." Lewis pulled into the garage. The engine cut. Silence fell. He sat in the cockpit for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel. Red gloves, red wheel, red car, red everything. He'd spent 11 years driving silver, winning in silver, becoming a legend in silver. But this felt like becoming himself again. Louis climbed out. The team surrounded him, congratulating him, welcoming him. Charles hugged him hard. "Welcome to the family, man. And it's going to be a hell of a ride." But Louis only had eyes for one person. Anthony stood at the edge of the garage, arms open. Louis walked to his father and collapsed into his embrace. Both men crying. Both men understanding that this moment, this simple test day at a private track, was the culmination of 30 years of love and sacrifice. "You did it, Dad," Louis whispered. "You gave up Ferrari so I could have it. And Ferrari never forgot. They never forgot you." "No," Anthony said firmly, pulling back to look his son in the eyes. "We did it. Together. Every mile we traveled. Every late night. Every sacrifice. We did it together." Frederick approached with a photographer. "Gentlemen, we need to capture this moment for history." Anthony and Louis stood together in front of the SF-25, father and son, and the man who walked away from Ferrari, and the man who finally walked in. The photographer counted down. 3, 2, 1. Just before the shutter clicked, Anthony whispered to Louis, "Are you happy, son?" Louis looked at his father, at the red car behind them, at the Ferrari logo, at everything they'd journeyed through to reach this moment. "I'm home, Dad," Louis said. "I'm finally home." The camera captured the moment. Two men smiling through tears, a red Ferrari gleaming behind them, and Giuseppe Moretti's promise, invisible but present, hovering over them like a blessing. Some dreams don't die. They just wait for the right moment to come home. And after 30 years, through sacrifice and love and institutional honor, Lewis Hamilton and Anthony Hamilton had finally come home together. To Maranello, to Ferrari, to Red. So that's the incredible true story of how a 5-minute phone call and a father's sacrifice brought Lewis Hamilton home to Ferrari after 29 years. Now, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. We love connecting with our amazing viewers from all around the world. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you're helping us spread more stories of kindness, sacrifice, and love to people everywhere. Let's build a community that celebrates what really matters in life. And don't go anywhere. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now for another incredible story that will inspire you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.